This is Tush, and I welcome you to Tushalicious Talk, an Oklahoma City podcast for titillating women, tantalizing conversation. And I thank you in advance for allowing me to be your one-stop shop advocacy connection. Hello again. This is Jackie, aka Tush, and welcome to another episode of Tushalicious Talk, where we talk about things related to Oklahoma County, since I am the president of the League of Women Voters in Oklahoma County. And today our episode is when to put a protective order on your baby daddy with Palomar OKC. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So that is why I invited Palomar to come speak with us. And if everyone doesn't know, Thursday, October the 19th is Purple Thursday. So wear your purple on that day and post a picture on your social media with hashtag Purple Thursday or hashtag Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And with us, we have Hillary Burkholder. I got that right?
Yes.
Burkholder. She is the CEO at Palomar. And if you will tell us just a little bit more about your position and what you do there and what all services Palomar provides, please.
Yes, thank you. Like she said, I'm Hillary Burkholder. I have been the CEO at Palomar since April of 2022. It has been my honor to come alongside the work that was started by Kim Garrett, our founder, and our board of directors, and really building an Oklahoma City Family Justice Center. So that's a model that began out in the 90s in California, this idea that survivors shouldn't have to navigate all these complex systems separately, and the barriers to try to access all of those services when you are going to separate locations. And so the concept is really trying to pull together the government and nonprofit agencies that someone would need to access. So at Palomar, we're really focused on domestic violence this month, since it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but we also serve survivors of sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, children that have witnessed violence, and pet and elder abuse as well. And so if someone comes to Palomar, they can meet with any number of our partners. It's always really driven by the survivors' priorities and their needs. And we are just helping to facilitate that. So our staff meet with them to kind of really understand their story and to educate them on what's available. And then they can connect with the people that they need to. So whether that is filing a VPO, a victim protective order, making a statement with law enforcement in a place that feels safe and trauma-informed instead of going down to the police station. Maybe that's accessing civil legal services. So maybe getting a divorce or pursuing a custody case. Our advocacy agencies like the YWCA, La Luz, and LCDA, they all provide safety planning and advocacy support. We have mental health on site. So we have a liaison from the Department of Mental Health, and then we have lots of community-based mental health agencies that are there. And so they can get therapy or group work on site. We have a children's sanctuary. So if someone does need to bring their kids, that removes that barrier, and they can bring them. And the people that are in the sanctuary are trained to really build relationship with those children and help make them feel safe and a connection. We also have food and charging stations and all of those things, a store with hygiene products and clothes and diapers. So, you never know necessarily when you might decide to flee. Mm-hmm. And so trying to meet all of those basic needs so they can focus on their journey.
Cool. So you said you help people with divorces. So anyone looking for a divorce can come in, or it has to be within the specifications?
Yes, someone related to one of those victimizations can come in, and we would serve them through that. Mm-hmm. So not anyone looking for a divorce. We have legal aid attorneys on site, so they do most of those civil legal services. And then we do have a Palomar legal network, because oftentimes, just capacity-wise, legal aid has more than what they can handle, but also sometimes there are things with the financial resources being tied up with their abuser or other things where they might not qualify under certain circumstances. Mm-hmm. And so we also recruit volunteer attorneys that are willing to take on those family law cases as well.
Awesome. Very much needed. So before we get into examples of abuse, will you go over again the categories of people that you help as far as you said sexual assault victims and who else?
Yeah, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, child, elder, and pet abuse, those are all things that often go together. A lot of the child abuse is co-occurring with domestic violence. Mm-hmm. So things that happen typically inside the home are really kind of the focus area.
Mm-hmm. And so for trafficking, do we see quite a bit of that in Oklahoma?
So the Dragonfly Home is our partner on that, mm-hmm. and they do a lot of that piece. And yes, we have a high amount of trafficking, both labor and sexual. And so there are experts in the certified partner that we bring in when that happens. We don't necessarily have as high of numbers that come to Palomar for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, you said what type? You said labor and what else?
In sex trafficking, yeah.
Labor, what's labor trafficking?
So being held against your will to do work, but not necessarily sex work, yeah.
Wow. I did not even know that was a thing. Okay. So when I looked on the website, and their website is PalomarOKC.org, I saw this thing called a power and control will. Mm-hmm. And I think that I would like to discuss it because I think a lot of people might not even realize that they are in an abusive relationship. And some of the things that are listed there, a person might just want to think twice and say, am I in an abusive relationship or am I the abuser in an abusive relationship? So it said that the power and control will was a diagram used to show the abusive tactics an abuser might use to keep their victim in the relationship. And the first one was coercing and threatening. And it says threatening to harm the victim, harm pets, loved ones, or themselves, or leave a threatening report to Child Protective Services. Do you see a lot of that?
Yeah, I think the coercion and the threatening is a powerful mechanism for that fear conditioning that abusers use to keep victims in a relationship. So I think the important distinction to make is that it is when there is not an equal power dynamic between the two people in a relationship, and that someone is using a pattern of power and control over someone. So that's really what we're looking at when we look at domestic violence, instead of kind of an isolated incident or something that might just be a toxic relationship in both directions. It is really about that pattern of coercive control and that power dynamic. So, the coercion and threatening is a powerful tool and is one of the real barriers for people making that choice to leave. We, I think we've all probably heard people say when they've heard about someone in a situation like this, well, why don't they just leave?
Yeah.
And that's one of
it's not that
those
simple.
Reasons. Yeah.
I find it crazy that abusers will threaten to call Child Protective Services. And that's really real because I know some people who have been in toxic relationships and, one person will say to the other, well, I'm going to call DHS on you because you did A, B, C, and D. And it's just crazy to me because you're the reason that, it's going to come back on you, Well,
I think that's one of the interesting things and a hard thing sometimes for service providers that don't have really intentional training around domestic violence to recognize sometimes because often, abusers can be very charismatic, very put together. Yes. All of those are things that they use in the beginning of the relationship. Yeah. And someone who has been being gaslit and terrorized and threatened often doesn't come across as someone who has everything together. Or at times, maybe they're using substances either that are being forced on them by the abuser, the person who's using violence, or maybe they're using that as a way to self-medicate what's going on. But there are sometimes, I think people often think that they would be able to point out someone who is a person who's going to use violence. And I think the reality is it's really just not that simple, and that there are no perfect people, so there are no perfect victims. So sometimes people will say, oh, well, if they are, behaving erratically, or if they are using substances, it calls into question maybe their experience when it shouldn't.
Yeah. I'm going to skip down the list to where it said denying, blaming, and minimizing. It's making light of abusive behaviors, saying that it didn't happen, using visitation to harass the person, shifting responsibility to the victim, threatening others, and victim blaming. And I say that because all that is gaslighting. And so I said, I think that's the perfect definition for gaslighting, because people don't necessarily understand what gaslighting is. It's become a really big word on social media, and I see it misused a lot. Do you have like a specific example of gaslighting?
Well, I mean, I think all of what's listed here is what happens. I think, when a lot of times when we see a survivor, they're just second guessing themselves and whether something is abusive, or that maybe, they would say, well, this did happen to me, but I did XYZ that caused it, instead of just understanding that nothing, regardless of what that other interaction was, didn't warrant the abuse that they're experiencing.
Right.
Yeah.
The means and the end. Yeah. It's, I describe it as mental manipulation. Absolutely. Or mental abuse, psychological abuse. That's what gaslighting is. When you have a valid point and the person that doesn't have a valid point is trying to make you seem like you don't have a valid point. And then you start second guessing, like, do I have a valid point? When you know that you really did have a valid point. So yeah, that's kind of what gaslighting is to me.
Yeah. And I think, what we often hear from survivors are, the physical abuse when it happens is horrific and should never happen to people. But the long-term impacts really do come from that emotional and psychological abuse. Those are the things that our survivors are still dealing with and working through years later. And they will often say that's the hardest part of moving forward. So I think the gaslighting, and then up above that, I think the other thing is the isolating, them not feeling like they have a community or a safe place to go and share that information with. And they've become so isolated that it's hard to reach out.
Limiting outside activities, controlling contact with other people, and using jealousy. Yeah. And even on isolating, if it's just within the family, like a person's mom or dad or whatever, they can be a part of the isolation, because you can report some type of abuse and then they'll be like, oh no, it's you did that. And then still not feeling in that safe place, that safe space. So that still comes within the isolation as well. Yeah. Yeah.
And we know that there are cycles of abuse. So 78% of kids who witness violence will use violence themselves if there isn't intervention. And so, you often will see someone who uses violence and their parents will definitely maybe have lived that themselves. And so don't see anything wrong with that relationship.
Right. Until somebody else points it out. Yeah. That's why I like this list. It helps to point it out. So intimidating as well is a part of gaslighting. And that's, causing fear through looks, gestures, behavior, or destroying property, abusing pets, and displaying weapons. You don't even have to use the weapon, but just displaying the weapon to cause that intimidation and that fear. I've seen that quite a lot in some couples, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think, people that are using violence get really good at knowing really subtle ways to keep the person intimidated. Exactly. Yeah. And so it, if they're out around others, they often won't notice those things, or it'll just be a really slight, maybe it's, you get an elbow dug into your side when you're out with friends and you're not saying what they want you to say, or an item that doesn't really mean anything to somebody else, but with all the context, the victim knows exactly what that is insinuating. And so I think that's one of the other kind of challenges for people that might have someone that comes to them and discloses that they might think, oh, well, I didn't see it. I haven't known. And so I think it's so important for people to just start from a place of belief and know that sometimes these things aren't as apparent as we would think they might be.
I think that goes back to the isolation as well. People not believing you or being afraid that people will not believe you. So you might isolate yourself. Yeah. Next on the list is emotional abuse, and that's put downs, name calling, financial freedom through mind games, gaslighting, access to money. Actually, I think that's the financial abuse. I think I labeled that wrong. This is financial abuse. So yeah, financial decision making, not allowing someone to have financial freedom. So I want to cover the financial freedom because I think so many people don't realize that there is a such thing as domestic abuse through financial abuse.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is another one of the biggest barriers that people face when they are trying to make a decision to leave. So maybe they haven't been allowed to work outside of the home, or maybe oftentimes the people that are using violence will open accounts or use the victim's name in getting credit. And so sometimes their credit is ruined and they have no idea until they try to leave. So that is another powerful way to keep people feeling stuck. And it might be even things like the house and the cars are in abuser's name. And so if I try to leave, how am I going to do that? Where am I going to go? Especially if kids are involved. If you're trying to make the decision of, and say the shelter beds, which they often are because we just have such high incidences of domestic violence here. If they're all full and you've been isolated and you don't have anyone's home to go to. If you're trying to decide between sleeping out on the street or going back to an abuser, those are impossible situations.
It's the not allowing them financial freedom, maybe not even allowing them to have a job or access to the checking account or, even money within the house or whatever, just no access to the money at all. That definitely could leave a person within a toxic relationship. And so the last bullet I wanted to cover was using the children. In my head, I would think that this one maybe goes about 50-50 with men and women. Definitely want to say that women can also be abusers as well, because there's a huge stigma that only men abuse women, but that is not the case. There's definitely women that abuse men. So as far as the children go, creating guilt about the children, using kids to deliver messages, using visitation to harass, and then threatening to take the kids away.
And so I think a helpful statistic, so in Oklahoma, they estimate that as many as 49% of women and 40% of men will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. So it really, the numbers are much higher for men than I think we often think about. And of course, those also include same-sex relationships as well. So not necessarily just related to heterosexual relationships. And at Palomar, we serve about 15% of our population are males. And yes, the children, I think, the unfortunate thing is that they experience a lot of trauma by being exposed to this. But then, yes, they're often used in this cycle as well as a way to create those power dynamics and to punish the other person. And so that's why we have so many kid programming, because we know that it's really important to break that cycle And so we have our children's sanctuary, and then we also have Camp Hope, which is for kids who have witnessed violence between 7 and 17. And it's an evidence-based program. It is built on the science of hope. Kids go to a summer camp for a week out of the year where they are, we call it challenge by choice. They're doing zip lining and power poles and all of these kind of high activity activities, and they are learning how to be resilient. They're learning how to challenge themselves, but we also have curriculum around what we call hope heroes. And so the whole concept is that they believe in themselves, they believe in others, and they believe in their dreams. And so and then that is carried on throughout the year with monthly reunions where the mentors and the hope coaches that they engage with come back every single month. They get together and they continue to build on those skills and to create new goals.
Awesome. That really is awesome. I would just say to anybody, if you find yourself being the person that is doing any of these things, keep the kids out of it. Don't do that to the kids. Don't send messages through the kids. Be an adult and communicate properly. Unfortunately, Oklahoma is number one in domestic violence out of all 50 states. So I think that we, as citizens and family and loved ones, friends of each other, should focus on when to help a person that would be in a toxic relationship. So if you notice any of these things, just simply figure out a way to mention it to them, because you never know if they are not cognitively aware that they are doing these things, or I don't want to say that they're doing these things, that it's not a best decision, a scenario to be active in these behaviors. If they don't recognize that within themselves, then as a friend or a loved one, if you simply say, you might be a little bit abusive, that could go a long way in a lot of situations. So there was a tab on the website that said how to help loved ones. And so what are some tips if someone does want to help somebody else and maybe not offend them, but just kind of want to point out and try to make their household, more positive without, so much being in everybody else's business, but you still just want to help?
Sure. Yeah. I think starting with the idea that we all, have to take the stance that this is unacceptable in our community is really important, that we won't tolerate that people being abusive to each other. Also being really careful that there are things that we call like flashpoints that can escalate abuse. So really thinking through those so that they don't put a victim in additional harm if you're trying to approach the person who's using violence. But for the person who is a victim of these things, I think it's really important first to just start by believing. And so that initial reaction they get is so important for them to feel validated. And so if they feel initially like they're shut down or not believed, they're likely to really shut down and withdraw. And so I think that is the most important piece. You don't have to be investigating all the details. You don't have to be doing anything other than just believing and validating their experience in a very non-judgmental way. I think the other thing that's really important to remember is that these are really complicated. We've talked about some of those barriers. These are complicated, complex situations. And statistically, people don't typically leave on their first attempt of leaving and never go back. And so,
isn't it the seventh time?
That's the statistic. And so, I think if you are someone who loves someone who's going through this, that can be really hard to watch and really hard not to be judgmental of. But that's so important to be able to be open and to recognize that it may take multiple times of trying to leave. And so not withdrawing your support and not making them feel further isolated by just getting frustrated and giving up. And so one of the things we recognize that's a really hard position for people to be in. So one of the things we've recently implemented is a secondary survivor support group. So people that love people that either are currently or have been abused in the past. And so that happens on the second Tuesday of every month at noon. And so anyone who has that experience of, walking alongside someone who has been on that domestic violence journey can come and get some support in a facilitated group. And so I think that's going to be really, really important for people. I think the other thing is really encouraging them to engage in either services or to at least do a safety plan. There are a lot of websites. If they come to your house and they have, maybe they don't have access to safe internet at home, maybe you could get on and help them create that. There are online tools to do that, or the domestic violence hotline is always available and they can do that through there. We have on our website, if someone doesn't want to come in, we have a virtual chat where we can work with them on those pieces. And then Palomar is open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's a walk-in facility, so they can come in at any of those times. They don't need an appointment. And we have often had people say, my sister or my friend or my pastor told me to come here and I'm not quite sure why. So if you are that loved one, just encouraging them to reach out. Then we can pick up that conversation and dig more into those details. But I think at the end of the day, also realizing that they are the experts in their own story, and that they are at the greatest risk of physical harm when they decide to leave. And so that's a big decision and not one that can be taken lightly or necessarily done quickly. And so making sure that they have had time to take those steps and to process what that's going to be like is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I am a big advocate for therapy. So, if you need therapy, you need couples counseling or something like that, you can always try that first. And then if it's not working and it's remaining toxic, then yes, definitely reach out to Palomar and see the pros and cons of doing the protective order and how to move forward out of the toxic relationship. So,
yeah, I think it is also important for people and sometimes you don't know until you've done more work on that. But there is that difference between kind of just a mutually toxic relationship and that domestic violence pattern. And when they are in a true domestic violence situation, couples counseling, I've heard of a lot of survivors that have said, my pastor maybe referred us to a Christian counseling, someone that's focused on maintaining the relationship. That can not always be the best approach for people. So I would say if they are in a place where they're not quite sure, that it's probably beneficial for them to also pursue their own individual therapy, where they can work through some of that in case that it is really, truly a domestic violence situation.
Yeah. Okay, well, before we end, because we are running out of time, I do want to point out that you guys do an annual trunk or treat, and I have been to them probably like the last 4 years or so. They have free costumes for the kids out there, and it's always before Halloween. So, and anyone is welcome. You don't have to have a survivor story or even have used Palomar services. You just show up at the trunk or treat, and it's a really cool ordeal out there. And they always have king size candy bars out there.
Yeah, we try to open our doors so that people can get familiar with us. So if they ever do need us, it feels like a comfortable, safe place. So trunk or treat this year is October 21st, 2 to 4. It's out in our parking lot. A lot of our partners will have trunks. lots of arts and crafts and candy and just a lot of fun. And then we actually also have our last open house of the calendar year, October 25th, so that week after. And that's a time where people can just walk through and get a feel for what the facility is like. Our partners host tables where they can talk about their services that are available, and people can just get more familiar with kind of what it's like to be there, because that can be a really intimidating thing. And you never know when you might need to recommend our services to someone.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely appreciate you for coming. And again, if you find yourself on either end of any of these categories, please recognize that you need to do something to fix the situation. And if that's reaching out to Palomar, please go ahead and reach out to Palomar. Can you give us your address and website and contact information?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are at 11th and Hudson, on the corner of 11th and Hudson. The address is 1140 North Hudson. And our website is palomarokc.org. We're also on socials at Palomar OKC. Our phone number is 552-1010 if you want to call and talk to someone. And the kind of virtual chat that I mentioned can also be done on our website.
Awesome. So you can follow the League of Women Voters at LWVOK County on Facebook. And our website is www.lwvokc.org. And the last thing I'm going to say is that Palomar uses or was established from the MAPS money, the MAPS 4 money. And I'm very glad that that is something that the MAPS money was used for. So that's what our tax dollars should be used for. And thank you so much for listening, and have a great day. Bye. Tushalicious Talk is part of the Breaking Ice, Building Bridges community podcast platform, brought to you by Possibilities, Inc.